Yeah. Flew in yesterday. Huh? Yeah, you live here, man. Yeah. All right. It's 10:30. Welcome, everyone, to my talk. My name is Michael O'Rourke, and my talk is about bootstrapping new economic paradigms. I wish I had time to talk about the black market of FCC tickets that was happening as an economic paradigm, but unfortunately I didn't have time to do that. So I'm just going to move forward, give you a little bit about myself. I've been in the space since 2013 when I bought my first Bitcoin, mainly because I read an article about the Silk Road on Wired and just fell in love with the space. Basically had a history degree in college, learned to code before I graduated. We started writing some smart contracts in late 2016 after the DAO hack, and kind of came up with the idea for Pocket. For context, Pocket is a protocol that incentivizes people to run full nodes. So it's a developer platform. You can think of us as like a decentralized API. So it's a protocol that's a middleware. And we launched it almost 4 years later after lots of iteration. So we actually launched our mainnet almost a year ago to the date. About 8 days from now will be our year birthday of our mainnet, which is pretty exciting. And since then, we support over 12 chains. So these are 12 full nodes, and or full nodes for 12 different chains. And we've served over 1 billion requests on the network on Pocket, which is pretty cool. So moving forward, I'm just going to give a quick overview of setting expectations of this talk. I'm going to give a quick history of other bootstrapped economies, and then I'm going to talk about just some through lines and lessons that hopefully you guys can take away from this. So moving forward, first off, this shit is really hard. As protocol builders, application builders, decentralized application builders, we have to worry about economics, governance, markets, the current state of the technology, all the different stakeholders, supply, demand, so many things. And this is really a really difficult thing all of us builders are doing. I just want to say that we're standing on the shoulders of giants from as far back as the early 70s. And I think it's really important that in this open source world that we really build things from first principles. It's so easy to just copy paste someone's model into your own project. And honestly, most of the time, it probably won't fit. So I really heavily recommend building and thinking about these crypto-economic models that we're building from first principles. Because what works for you may not work for someone else. So just keep that in mind. Moving forward, so to be clear, this is not a comprehensive list. I'm just going to give I'm going to talk about some topics that I'm close to or are near to me in some form or fashion. I just want to make sure that you all understand that this is meant to be kind of like, I want you to see this from a 30,000-foot view and more look at the trends of the kinds of decisions that have been made and how that's affected the various markets and economies that I'm about to talk about. So with that, I'm gonna move forward and give a really short history of the US dollar. You'll see a couple dates here, and I'm going to start talking about it a little bit right here. So first off, USD was like literally one of the worst stable coins of all time. Going back to the 1700s, we had this bimetallic system. So we had silver coins and gold coins. And the thing was that the government decided to peg the price of these coins to a ratio of silver or gold on these coins. So regardless of what the market price was, which is why you kind of see a flat line here until about the late 1800s, regardless of what the actual market price of these coins were, the government said that the price was X or Y based on this ratio. And this kind of reminds me of back when I was in like Argentina like years ago. And I remember the government quoted price for the dollar was something like 7 or 8 pesos. But in reality, the real market price was something like 14 to 16 pesos. And really, we had a similar situation in the US for like over 100 years, where the government said the price was one thing, and really the real price of gold or silver was another. And one of the problems with this was the government in trying to control this, the prices would just fluctuate so much of gold and silver. So the demand for gold would go up, and that would actually cause the supply of gold coins in circulation to completely to disappear. Because the inverse would happen with the silver coins, where the ratio was one thing, but in fact it was worth less than $1. So I would pay for $5 for something, and I'd in fact be paying like $4.50 or $4. And you'd have these weird incentives happen where there would be a discovery in gold in California and Australia, which crashed the price of gold, and the inverse happened. So all of a sudden, all the silver coins were taken out of circulation. This was really horrible UX for people. You had to know like what the prices were and all these things, and it was just it's a really big pain. So that's kind of a quick history of kind of like the early USD. In the mid-1800s, we still had a pretty laissez-faire, pretty decentralized system, actually. We had thousands of banks open up in the 1800s. And what's really interesting about this is there was really very little financial infrastructure available. The US was like pretty hands-off, the government was. So as a result, all these banks were kind of building their own systems and all their own things. And one of the main takeaways I want you to take from this is the fact that money wants to be used, and it tries to find ways to have leverage and to get, for people to get loans and these sorts of things and credit. And I found this quote really interesting. It was really hard to find what the supply was of the USD at the time, but with all the banks and all the notes of credit they had at the time, they had about, they had about $400 million worth of credit from all these kind of independent, decentralized, like thousands of banks, totaling about $400 million. And in this quote, it says it's like almost the amount of supply of USD in the system. So it's kind of an interesting contrast of like where we were 150 years ago in terms of USD in the system versus where we are now. But nonetheless, the really important part of this is that people went and built their own things because they had the incentives to do so. And it's pretty important, I think. So this was for me like the biggest turning point for the US. The US actually centralized USD. The Supreme Court struck down all these bank independent paper notes and basically took complete control of the dollar. And part of the challenge of, for example, having a bimetal monetary system is that you can't control the supply and demand of these metals, right? Like you can't determine whether some new object gets made, or there's some new coinage, or some new mint, or some new jewelry, or something that increases the demand of gold or silver. And conversely, with the supply of this, right, you can't guess when gold will get discovered, right? So this was a really big deal for the U.S. Like moralities aside, just the impact of unifying the dollar and having one place that people could use, or one thing that people could use, was pretty impactful, particularly when it comes to liquidity and impact of the dollar. As you can see, as over time the paper currency in circulation just exploded, and this is only up to 1940. I mean, I don't even want to look at the chart that's today, obviously, but I just want to really just highlight the fact that the unification of this was actually quite powerful, particularly in the context if you think about it with like Bitcoin and ETH today. So the last piece of this is actually when Bretton Woods and the demonetization of gold. So we got things locally in the national side of things, and then after World War II, we basically traded security for liquidity. And that's kind of how the US dollar became more or less a settlement layer of much of the world today. In 1971, we demonetized gold, so no longer could you officially actually trade your dollars for gold, and as a result, the dollar ended up becoming kind of the dominant settlement layer. And again, I just want to kind of talk about how like really these paper notes are credit, and that's what kind of gave the US so much leverage in these kinds of conversations, and we had the control of the supply and the demand up until the demonetization of gold in terms of bringing dollars out of supply. As a result, that's kind of how the US dollar became. But it's just really interesting to think about in terms of context of how BTC and ETH are kind of the dominant settlement currencies or cryptos that we have today. And it just kind of highlights how early we are, particularly because we've had this kind of hegemonic dollar for so long now. I'd love to see a future where we see like many different dominant settlement layers and how that interacts with each other in a proper way. So moving forward, I'm going to fast forward a little bit in time. I have a pretty deep history in playing lots of video games. So I'm going to talk about a couple important video games that are near and dear to my heart. But first, I want to talk about this paper that this guy, Zachary Booth, wrote in 1999. He was one of the developers for this game called Ultima Online. And it's actually the first MMORPG that reached 100,000 users. live, right? And he kind of defined 5 essential roles of online economies. The first one being rationing power, which basically if you're a new person in a game, you can't have like the most overpowered weapon, right? You kind of have to work towards getting the kind of most important things in the game and so on and so forth. Specialization is like, the same thing as we do in real life, We get really good at one thing, we earn some wealth, and then we trade it for other things, other goods and services, and so on and so forth. Interaction, also very much real life, right? You want to interact with people, you want to interact with people online, right? Providing goals, again, another pretty real life thing. We all want to have goals, whether it's gaining levels or getting weapons or whatever it might be, or beating people in battles, whatever it is. These goals in games and I think in life are pretty important. And role playing. So what I mean by this is people want to be able to be an artisan or a merchant or a trader or whatever, a warrior, whatever it is. These are pretty important when it comes to online economies. And with that, I'm going to talk about the first game, which is Neopets. Has anyone here played Neopets? Any people? Yeah? Nice. I played so many hours of this game. It's ridiculous. I'm going to give a quick overview of I know you remember these games, yeah. I know you know this, yeah. So the Neopets Economy, it's really interesting. And one of the things that Zachary Booth defined in his paper was this idea of sources and sinks. Sources being where does the native currency of this game, how does that get created? And the sinks are where does it get deleted or depleted. In Neopets, you would play these flash games and you'd earn Neopoints, and you'd actually spend them so they'd exit the system completely when you'd go to these shops and actually spend money on these items. So that was kind of the main kind of way of which, if you want to think about it as minting and burning, how Neopoints were minted and burned was through games and kind of these shops. Interestingly enough, there was some data, and this is, this may not be true or not, but Neopoints were traded about 100 times before they actually exited the system between players in the game. And there was kind of like a 99% and 1% kind of a situation going on where 99% kind of created everything through the games, and the 1% kind of like bought, sold, and traded items from these shops and stuff like that. You'd try to get this really rare item that was worth millions of Neopoints, try to sell it. I spent many hours pressing F5 in these shops, unfortunately. So I want to talk about a couple examples of what happened. So this game, by the way, has been in existence since 2001. And they had this problem where you could DDoS their servers and duplicate the most expensive items in the game. So for example, this super attack peak used to cost 250 million Neopoints, and you had like almost 1,000 of them for sale at $100,000. So this lasted for like 4 days. I'm sure you can imagine this crashed the prices of all these really expensive items. So the team had kind of this choice of either do we go nuclear and kind of roll back the servers, or do we kind of go and ban people and try to track down everyone? So they kind of got a lot of feedback from the community and stuff like that, and they actually decided to not roll back the servers, but actually just go forward and kind of ban people and so on and so forth. This settled down, like the super attack P ended up being like a fourth of what it originally cost. So there was some damage to the pricing of these things, but nonetheless, I just think it's an interesting parallel to like the DAO hack and how he kind of grew forward and how these guys kind of had the same situation in like 2001 or whenever it was. So it's quite interesting on that front. I'm going to be talking about friction a lot, and this was interesting because if you were familiar with the game, basically there were 2 ways to buy and sell things. One was through this thing called the trading post, which is this really like opaque, difficult, annoying thing where people would be like, oh, I'm selling this thing, and you'd neo-mail them, and after a few days you'd like try to haggle, and then you'd say, okay, this is the offer, and then you finally like get the items. And the other way was through the shop wizard, which was like super simple, really transparent. You'd see, if I searched my mega P-Gurt smoothie, for example, in this picture, you see the items that are there and the costs and so on and so forth. And the problem was that they only let you list items up to 100,000 Neopoints on the shop wizard. And as a result, there was a whole set of items that were only available through the trading post. And one thing that the Neopets team did was they increased the maximum price that you could actually post items with. Up to 1 million Neopoints. And what happened was all that opacity, all these difficult transactions all moved over to the shop wizard and actually lowered the prices of everything because of the liquidity and the availability of all these items. And just by adding all this transparency, it actually made things much easier for people and improved the economy of the system, interestingly enough. There's this other kind of concept called donation sinks. So back to the kind of the sources and sinks concept that I talked about earlier. If you guys are interested in like NFTs or gaming or anything like this, I think this could be really interesting for you. So there's two kinds of sinks in most games. There's item sinks and there's like the currency sinks. The item sinks, so in this case on the left you'll see the charity corner. You had so many items in this game, and some of them were, they had these like rarity numbers. So in this charity corner, you could donate any item that was between rarity 90 and 99 to get some random item that could be worth a lot of money. You could trade something that cost 5,000 Neopoints into something that was worth like millions, for example. And people found some of these items that were worth like 45 Neopoints at the time and kept kind of farming this charity corner. And in fact, this actually caused the price of these things to increase 1,000-fold from 45 Neopoints to like 50,000 Neopoints. So I'm curious as to how people, if you all are building, some application or thinking about NFTs or anything like that, how you might be able to implement some mechanism like this. I haven't seen this too much yet. And the second one, so the other kind of sink is actually the currency sink. So this is something called the lever of doom, where you just spend 100 Neopoints and just pull it, and nothing would happen. Absolutely nothing. It's just spend 100 Neopoints and that's it. But what happened was you would actually have a very tiny chance of getting an avatar from the forums. So people would end up spending millions of Neopoints, literally pulling this thing for hours to try to get this avatar. So it's a pretty creative sink in terms of exiting the currency out of the system. So again, I just want you to think about like minting and burning and staking in the crypto context and how creative we can get with these kind of things. So moving forward, I'm going to talk about another game near and dear to my heart, RuneScape. We only had one person here playing Neopets before. Did anyone else play RuneScape when they were younger? No? Okay, another one person. Cool. So RuneScape is an interesting game. It was a MMORPG, so it was more fantasy-based, whatever. And what's really interesting about kind of comparing from RuneScape to Neopets is that Neopets had a couple sinks that were really powerful. RuneScape had many sinks that weren't that powerful. And a lot of people actually complained about how there was so much inflation in the RuneScape economy as a result. And the team didn't seem to be very keen on increasing the incentives of these sinks, interestingly enough, for whatever reason. But if you ever played the game, it was a huge pain to like buy and sell things. Like you see this like massive words that's just incredibly hard to get around. And you basically go to this place and try to buy and sell things, and it was just really, not fun. And it wasn't really until 6 years in, they launched something called the Grand Exchange, which basically unified all these RuneScape servers. So one thing I didn't mention was that there were hundreds of these RuneScape servers. You could only have 2,000 people in each server, and you just kind of had these kind of you think about like kind of like Cosmos and how each Tendermint chain has like its own independent thing. Really, the Cosmos or the RuneScape servers are kind of like that, where they each kind of have like their own independent economy. And you can think of the Grand Exchange as like the hub of Cosmos and how it just kind of interconnected everything. And it actually really increased liquidity, decreased friction, and just really improved the economy of the RuneScape world, which is pretty interesting. I remember buying an item, buying and selling items. I started earning 50% more on some like iron ore I was mining as a result of the Grand Exchange opening, which is pretty cool. So I was like, damn, yeah, I get some more money now. So those are kind of just some quick examples. I just want to talk about some of the lessons that I think you might be able to take away from this. So you had the kind of 5 roles for online economies. I kind of remixed this a little bit into 5 rules for crypto economies. Rationing power, I think in these permissionless systems, it's less important for someone to be forced to have to be new, right? If you want to come in with $1 million or with all the effort in the world to get a DAO grant for something, well then go for it, right? I don't think that you necessarily have to be limited like that in real life. So I replaced it for communication. I think it's super hypercritical as we bootstrap these new economies that we communicate. There's so many stakeholders, users, supply, demand side, investors, speculators. There's just so many different things that we have to worry about when we're building these things, and communication is just so incredibly important. I think specialization is, I think I kept that the same. I think that's just exactly how it should be. We have people who are, in Pocket, for example, you have people who are running nodes, you have applications, you have people who are voters in the DAO, right? So you have different kinds of specializations that these protocols can participate in. Instead of interaction, I kind of leveled it up into community. This is probably one of the biggest moats that we can have in crypto today, particularly when it comes to leveling up your protocol, collective action, and DAOs, and so on and so forth. Instead of providing goals, I kind of evolved that into liquidity. I think that's so hyper-critically important in their space. And even, this is kind of difficult for me because as a US-based entity, we have to kind of be very careful about this. But nonetheless, it really is important. And that's why we've seen, for example, the success of Uniswap, Balancer, Bancor, and so on and so forth, is because this is just really is important. I mean, how many tokens have no usage but massive liquidity? And it's also a really big moat, actually. And I think role-playing is also important, right? Like you've got protocol politicians, you've got core developers, you've got just so many different roles. You've got research analysts, economics, so on and so forth. I still think that that's pretty important for crypto economies, regardless. I think that launching your product or protocol as bare bones as possible is really important too. In Pocket's case, we launched with barely anything. We just launched a blockchain, barely a block explorer, barely a wallet, and really nothing else. I think this is a massive opportunity for people who believe in your project to actually contribute and participate, whether it's asking for a DAO grant, especially if they believe in the project, right? Because one, it gets people more bought in. Two, it allows people who are building on your project to learn about it even more deeply, right? And it's just an incredible opportunity in my opinion, to really build community. So make sure you just find that one thing that you're solving, and just launch it. To be honest, I don't think it needs to be perfect or anything like that, personally. Also think about your sources and sinks. So this is also from the paper that I talked about earlier. This is kind of the original economic flow that they had. You can think of this as like some ERC20 token that just has a stable supply, and they kind of have to find ways for people to use it, right? They evolved their flow into, you kind of see the faucet and the drain here, which are sources and sinks, and they actually found that the success of their economy was much better. Things moved much more fluidly, and so on and so forth. This might not be a popular opinion, but I kind of think of fees within blockchains and protocols as kind of like the banner ads of the early 90s, right? So when Netscape first came out and we first had these first websites and stuff, people took kind of the ads from the newspapers and kind of just slapped them on these kind of Netscape websites and stuff like that. And it wasn't until 10, 15 years later that we kind of saw like mobile native advertising and these kinds of things. I personally think that things like staking, minting, and burning are much more crypto native and allows for much more granularity, creativity, and really much more efficiency in terms of how we transfer value. Like if you think about it, if I send a fee to someone on some layer 1 blockchain, how many nodes are having to reach consensus about this simple fee, right? Whereas if I'm staking, think about the amount of energy of staking once and then people doing a bunch of work as a result of that. It's just intuitively much less energy being spent, which I think is important. Find your fulcrum. What's the thing that people use your service for? For Pocket, it's requests. It could be anything if you're building a game, whatever it is, right? Interestingly enough, the most popular fulcrums in crypto today are memes and speculation. I hope that in the future we start to get more product-focused fulcrums. Although to be fair, having a really strong product with a really strong meme game is the best thing you could probably do, to be honest. So really, what's the thing that's going to really push your project forward and create demand for it, right? And of course, remove friction. This is kind of a common theme. You want to increase the surface area of interaction, right? Before I was staking, earning some yield. Now I'm staking, earning creating a synthetic with Lido and F2, and now I can make more money from that. We're kind of just increasing the leverage and reducing friction, which comparing to where kind of like the U.S. was in the 1800s and where we are today, you can kind of just see how early we are in all this. And just wrapping up, this gives us some context of kind of the importance of BTC and ETH in today's terms. Markets want to find some liquidity, give your community a chance to build what you need, and I'd say experiment with different ways of minting, burning, and staking within your protocols. And with that, I'm done. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, I have a few minutes. I don't know if you have any questions. If not, no big deal. No? Cool. Thanks, everyone.